Welcome back to Klepper's Corner, Today in History. May 14th is one of those dates where history walks in wearing a toga, a crown, a lab coat, a military uniform, and then somehow ends up stuck in traffic. So today, we are looking at rituals nobody understood. Empires that overestimated themselves, governments that experimented on people, and humanity's endless belief that the next terrible idea will definitely be the organized one. Ancient Rome gives us the ritual of the Argi, which is a beautiful reminder that bureaucracy is older than paperclips. On May 14th, Roman officials, priests, and Vestal virgins marched through the city collecting 27 straw figures shaped like bound human men, then carried them to the old wooden bridge over the Tiber and threw them into the river. By the late Republic, nobody really knew what the ritual meant anymore, which is comforting if you have ever attended a work meeting where everyone nods solemnly at a PowerPoint nobody can explain. The best guess is that these little straw victims absorbed the spiritual filth of Rome, like ancient municipal air fresheners with a homicide vibe. The Romans believed in keeping the peace of the gods, which meant if the city smelled politically, morally, or literally swampy, you did not reform the sewer system. You drowned some wicker dudes and hoped Jupiter appreciated the effort. The darker tradition said the whole thing may have replaced actual human sacrifice, because apparently at some point someone said, what if instead of murdering one guy per neighborhood, we pivot to crafts? That is progress, Roman style. Fewer corpses, more reeds. It is easy to laugh at them, but modern society does the same thing with better lighting. We keep ceremonies, slogans, and institutions long after the original purpose has drifted downriver. We do not always know why the ritual exists. We just know the important people are dressed up, the crowd is watching, and somebody better throw something symbolic into the water before the economy gets nervous. May 14th also offers a masterclass in medieval warfare, which mostly seems to be men in armor discovering that confidence is not a strategy. In 1097, the armies of the First Crusade arrived at Nicaea, the capital of the Sultanate of Rum, expecting a brutal siege and finding that Sultan Khalij Arslan had made the classic leadership error of assuming the sequel would be exactly like the pilot episode. He had crushed the earlier People's Crusade so easily that he underestimated the heavily armed princes now parked outside his city. That is like beating a raccoon in your trash can and deciding you are ready for a bear. The siege became a grim display of psychological warfare, with severed heads launched over walls and bodies dangled from ramparts, because medieval diplomacy had a very limited stationary budget. In the end, the real turning point came from Byzantine logistics, when Emperor Alexios had ships dragged overland onto the lake to cut off the city's supply line. Turns out, the most terrifying weapon in a siege is not always a sword. Sometimes it is a boat where a boat should not be. Then, in 1264, England gave us the Battle of Lewes, where Simon de Montfort defeated King Henry III and temporarily became the uncrowned power behind the throne. The battle helped lead to a parliament that included knights and burgesses, planting seeds for representative government. But the royalist collapse came partly because Prince Edward chased fleeing Londoners for miles out of personal revenge, leaving the main battle to fall apart behind him. It is the medieval equivalent of losing a national election because you got distracted fighting people in the comments. History keeps saying the same thing. You can have cavalry, castles, and divine right, but if your emotional regulation is worse than your battle plan, democracy may accidentally happen. Segment 3, and empires learn that mountains, mud, and cousins can be very bad for business. A few centuries later, May 14th continues with empires discovering that maps look much easier to conquer when they are flat. In 1450, Sultan Murad II and the young Mehmed, future conqueror of Constantinople, laid siege to the Albanian fortress of Kruje, expecting Ottoman power to roll over the mountains like a state-sponsored avalanche. Inside the fortress was a small garrison under Varana Khanty, while Skanderbeg, the Albanian resistance leader and former Ottoman commander, made the much smarter choice of not waiting politely inside to be crushed. He took mobile forces into the surrounding mountains and forests, harassing the Ottoman camp at night, burning supplies, cutting lines, and turning the siege into the world's most stressful camping trip. The Ottomans had cannons, numbers, and imperial competence. Skanderbeg had terrain, timing, and the ability to appear on a cliff like a man who had just ruined your whole quarterly projection. Kruge mattered because it showed Europe that Ottoman expansion could be slowed, not by one glorious open field showdown, but by stubborn defense and guerrilla pressure. Then, in 1509, at Agnadello, Venice demonstrated the other side of military wisdom: how to lose nearly everything because one commander wanted to look impressive. The Republic of Venice had built a mainland empire over centuries, and then its mercenary commander, Bartolomeo d'Alviano, ignored orders to avoid battle after repelling a few French attacks. He mistook a good opening minute for destiny, which is also how people end up buying crypto from a man filming in his car. The French army arrived in force, surrounded him, and crushed the Venetians. Machiavelli later observed that Venice lost in one afternoon what had taken centuries to build, which is the kind of performance review nobody wants from Machiavelli. Between Kruge and Agnadello, history offers a neat little contrast. Know your terrain, know your limits, and never let a cousin with an ego manage your empire's risk portfolio. Segment 4 and New Worlds, Old Traffic, and Medicine with a Cow Named Blossom. May 14th also delivers 3 different versions of human ambition stumbling forward with mixed paperwork. In 1607, English settlers landed at Jamestown, a swampy, mosquito-rich peninsula where the water was brackish, the labor was brutal, and many colonists were gentlemen whose survival skills began and ended at owning gloves. The Virginia Company wanted profit, the Crown wanted a foothold, and the colonists wanted gold. But what they mostly found was malaria, dysentery, and the immediate reality that the land already belonged to the Powhatan Confederacy. Leadership began with a sealed box from King James naming the governing council only after they arrived, which is a bold way to run a colony. Sail across the ocean first, open management later. The colony barely survived, but its survival opened the door to English colonization, tobacco wealth, indigenous displacement, and the brutal economics of slavery. Then, in 1610, King Henry IV of France, a monarch who had survived wars, religious massacres, and assassination attempts, was murdered because his carriage got stuck on a narrow Paris street that officials had been ordered to widen decades earlier. He survived 18 plots and lost to urban planning. Somewhere in every government office, a delayed infrastructure project is quietly loading a historical consequences cannon. And in 1796, Edward Jenner performed the first smallpox vaccination by taking cowpox material from milkmaid Sarah Nelms and infecting 8-year-old James Phipps, then later exposing the boy to actual smallpox to prove immunity. By modern ethics, that is less a clinical trial than a lawsuit wearing breeches. But it worked, launching vaccination and eventually helping eradicate smallpox worldwide. The cow involved was named Blossom, which is almost offensively charming for one of the most important medical breakthroughs in human history. Jamestown shows ambition without preparation. Henry IV shows reform stopped by neglect. Jenner shows science advancing through brilliance wrapped in moral panic. May 14th is basically humanity saying, yes, the method is questionable, but have you seen the results? Segment 5 and beer, bombs, borders, and the fine print of power. By the modern era, May 14th stops being subtle and starts handing out consequences in bulk. In 1932, nearly 100,000 New Yorkers marched down Fifth Avenue in the We Want Beer parade, demanding an end to prohibition. It was less drunken chaos than civic economics with a foam head. During the Great Depression, people were not just asking for a drink. They were asking why the government had turned a major industry into a gangster internship program. Prohibition had promised morality and delivered crime, lost tax revenue, and a nation so annoyed it held a parade for lager. Then, in 1945, Albert Stevens was secretly injected with plutonium by Manhattan Project doctors who believed he had terminal cancer. He did not. He had a benign ulcer. Without consent, he became one of the most radioactive human beings ever to survive, living for 2 more decades while unknowingly providing samples to the government. It is one of those stories where, for national security, becomes less an explanation and more a haunted basement with a filing cabinet. In 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the State of Israel in Tel Aviv, just hours before the British mandate expired, with the ceremony rushed before the Sabbath and the region already bracing for war. The declaration created a sovereign Jewish state after centuries of exile and immediately reshaped the Middle East, while also igniting conflicts whose shockwaves still define global politics. The backstage chaos was almost absurd. The location was supposed to be secret. Radio let everyone know. The text was finalized at the last minute, and leaders signed a blank parchment attached to typed pages. Then, in 1955, the Warsaw Pact was signed, supposedly to defend Eastern Europe, though it mostly became Moscow's legal wrapper for controlling its own allies. It never fought NATO, but it did invade Czechoslovakia. Finally, in 1973, Skylab launched and immediately started falling apart, forcing NASA engineers to save a space station with a parasol idea built around fishing rods. If there is a theme here, it is that power loves big declarations, but survival often depends on the people quietly fixing the mess afterward. In conclusion, May 14th is a full historical buffet of confident institutions discovering that reality does not respect ceremony, rank, paperwork, or military branding. Rome threw straw men into a river because nobody wanted to anger gods they could no longer explain. Kings lost battles because princes chased grudges. Empires hit mountains, mud, and ego. Colonists opened a sealed box and called it government. Doctors saved the world with a cow while violating every ethics board that had not been invented yet. Modern states demanded beer, built alliances, declared nations, hid experiments, and launched space stations that immediately needed emergency shade. So the lesson is not that humanity learns from history. The lesson is that humanity keeps making the same mistakes. But occasionally, someone brings a boat over a hill, a vaccine from a cow, or a fishing rod umbrella for a broken space station. And somehow, the whole ridiculous species survives another day.